Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your Oyster Ninja. Hope everybody's doing pretty good. Today, out of the blue, last night, I may or may not have been intoxicated. I put a post on the InstaWeb on Instagram, and I wanted to know, did anybody want to talk? Because I was in a talkative mood. And Miss Lauren here responded. She said, pick me, pick me. I want to talk. So here we are. I don't know Miss Lauren out of the blue. She doesn't know me. She's listened to one podcast episode. And here we are. So, Lauren, since I don't know you, to give you a proper introduction, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why'd you say pick me?
Yeah, so my name is Lauren Brady. I live in Olympia, Washington, so the capital of Washington State. I moved here about almost 6 years ago, so been here for a while. I'm actually from St. Louis, which I saw you recently guest shucked at the brewery. So
Yeah, fun time, Safley.
hopefully you had a good time in St. Louis. Um, so originally from St. Louis, so obviously not a lot of shellfish in that area, but moved here to finish my degree in environmental science with an emphasis on marine biology. Um, I've worked for a restaurant in town for the past about 5-ish years um, that I manage and I bartend and I serve as well. So that kind of ignited my passion for shellfish. I also was a farm intern, so helped grow gooey duck, oysters, clams. That's my initial background. And now I currently work for Pacific Shellfish Growers Association in Washington State. So we are a nonprofit that works with grower members to kind of facilitate a relationship between the public and, you know, oyster growers. So just getting the news out there and getting people excited about consuming oysters. So it's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. And you said like yesterday you did like a beach cleanup, right?
Yeah, we did our first beach cleanup in 2 years. So that was really exciting. I actually just started with PCSGA. So I've been here about a month and a half, and this was our first event back. We typically organize, there's an event called Slurp that we do here in Washington, where we kind of do like a chowder off sort of situation. Just everyone who has like what they think is the best chowder in the area, they come in and make all of their chowders, and we vote on that, and we do a bunch of raw oyster tastings, baked oysters, fried oysters, the whole shebang. So that is usually our biggest kind of play in town to get everyone interested and understand some more knowledge about oysters and clams. But we haven't been able to do that in the past 2 years. So this was our first official event back, which we were really excited. We had about 10 farms, like local farms, that contributed to the beach cleanup. So they came and just skimmed the waters and brought in tons of debris just to make sure that we're doing our part as stewards of the ocean, just to make sure that we're contributing to the cleanup and the re-education of, understanding our water system. So yeah, it was
That's
exciting.
awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Before I go into my first question, I want to ask you, what does it actually mean to you to be a steward of the ocean?
Education. I mean, honestly, just again, coming from kind of a landlocked area and not having a ton of background, it was really interesting to move somewhere where shellfish was such a backbone of the community. And to just understand that a lot of people still don't really know what shellfish does, like what these benefits are for our environment and what they can really do in the areas. So just kind of understanding how they contribute to not only water quality, but air quality, to at least here in the West Coast, we have a lot of issues with our tidal areas. So our intertidal zones have a lot of issues with staying, what's the word, I guess, together. So there's
That's fair. That's fair.
this brackish water coming in and just like kind of pulling out our intertidal zone. So understanding that oysters are this like just integral source of, you know, keeping our silt and our sand kind of in place and keeping our beaches where they need to stay. So just being able to educate people has been really fun and interesting. And, you know, especially working at a seafood restaurant that is owned by a farm, a local shellfish farm. We learn that people love oysters, but they don't know a whole lot about them. So it's really fun to just tell that story and have
Fun
that
to blow minds.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So what made you want to go to school for environmental science? Is like, does that all run together kind of?
I wanted to be a marine biologist since I was like 6, I think.
Why? Who picks that? No, just joking.
Well, you don't want to do it once you learn what it actually takes to do it. When you realize it's not just swimming with dolphins and like having fun in the ocean. So that changed pretty quickly once I started learning more about what that took. So I graduated from the Evergreen State College here in Olympia, Washington, which is a pretty unique school. For most people who don't know about it, it's they kind of design their programs based on a trade school perspective. So it's a traditional 4-year school. But what you do is you take a program, it's one solid program, and you take 16 credit hours worth of that program, and you focus on just this, you know, one specific subject, and you do a lot of field work. And it's a very, for a lot of environmental based practices, it's a very renowned school. So environmental science was kind of my way of just making sure I had a job once I finished school. So
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a need for it.
yeah.
I mean, the numbers are small, and you know, for you to want to go down that road even after you found out the ins and outs, it's very admirable of you. Did
I
you
try.
did you get it, Admiral? You get
Yeah.
okay. All right. That's enough of that. So I don't know if you mentioned it or not. So what's the restaurant that what's the oyster farm that owns the restaurant you work at?
It's Chelsea Farms Oyster Bar. So we've been an oyster farm since 1987. It's family owned and operated. So Shina and Kyle are our owners who took on the farm from their parents. So Linda and their dad, John Lentz, opened a farm in 1987. He used to be a gooey duck farmer. He kind of pioneered the way for the tide tumbled oyster. So as we know, this like very European style growing method, not unheard of, but definitely new in the West Coast. So that's kind of our claim to fame. They decided to open a restaurant in 2016, but didn't officially open until 2017. So I had just moved here, and by happenstance, you know, this was the first restaurant I ate at, and I was like, I love this place. So, you know, long story short, here I am 5.5-ish years later. So yeah.
So what do you think is the most important thing that you've learned since starting at the restaurant? And it could be about environment, it could be about oysters, it could be about life. I just want to know.
So I've worked in restaurants for the past 10 years. So I've actually been in restaurants for a long time. Kind of circle back to education. It's just, you know, I've always personally prided myself on working at restaurants that are more farm to table style, just so I have an actual kind of background as to where this food is coming from, and it can actually trace where we're getting our, like, sourcing our food from. And it's only grown since working at an oyster farm, because again, like, being from the Midwest, we have oysters, they're not great. um, there was DeMun Oyster Bar for a long time. That was a wonderful oyster bar in St. Louis, where they got their oysters sent daily via freight, but they closed it's got to be like 6 years ago. So there aren't really any, like, reputable sources for understanding or learning about shellfish. And so it's always been really important to know, like, I don't know, where's your chicken coming from? Where's your beef? Do you,
Right.
like, how do you source your food products? Are you over harvesting in an area when it comes to, green foods? Like, are you wild crafting and just decimating a population of food? So
Mm-hmm.
that's been really interesting to just kind of, like, learn through all of that. And again, Evergreen is kind of it's a hippie school. That's what we're known for. We're
Gotcha.
a lot of hippies.
Nothing
So
wrong with being a hippie. Nothing wrong with it. I feel like I would have fit
not at
right
all.
in back then. I promise you. I would have been the
As in,
biggest
a lot
hippie.
of the students, like, live in the woods
Okay.
before they go to school, kind of hippies. So
Nice.
yeah, like, grassroots hippies,
Yeah, yeah.
which is interesting. So you learn a lot that you just otherwise wouldn't really think about
Mm-hmm.
until you live out here, and you're just like, oh wow, did we just pick all of the fiddlehead ferns that are growing, and are we just gonna, like, kill this whole population? Like, stuff like that, where people are trying to just, make a quick buck, and you're
Mm-hmm.
selling to restaurants, and then you're like, oh, well, then there's not going to be any for anyone next year, because we
Mm-hmm.
just damaged the population. So again, education is just, like, the forefront for me in any food service experience. People love to hear the story. They get so excited when they have this, like, background to base what they're, like, why they're there.
Do you have like a fact or anything that you like to share with your diners that just blows their mind? Like, all right, once I tell them this, they're gonna go crazy over this fact.
It typically has to do with oysters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we grow Olympias here, which I'm sure you're aware of. For a long time, we're thought to be the cousins of Kumamoto's. So
Mm-hmm.
we were unsure if there were only 4 species or if there were 5 species, and, trying to understand that. Um, so something that I learned here that most natives don't know is that Olympia is actually named after the oyster, not the other way around. So people get kind of up in arms. They're like, what? Because it's like tiny little oyster that was thought to be extinct for, like,
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah.
Just nobody realized that we planted this entire community around this oyster. So they get really excited about that.
That's cool. I was gonna save this question for the last question, but because we're on this educational piece and because, obviously you know what you're talking about. Where do you see, like, what's your end game? Which is a very mature question, but you're a mature person. I can tell.
I hope so. I I'm not sure if I know if I have an end game yet, just because I've kind of branched off into this new sector of shellfish industry. Um, but I feel so redundant right now. But again, it's just education. It's just
Yeah.
really getting people excited, and, like, coming from food service, I feel like I have this unique perspective in this new facet of my industry,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where we can kind of put ourselves in a PR perspective and, like, just get the word out there and get people excited about what they're consuming and how they're contributing to the environment. Especially after going to, like, Billion Oyster Project this past September, and just seeing everyone be so excited. We were, of course, not the only West Coast farm, but we were, I think, the only one from, no, it was us and Hama Hama from Washington. But people were just like, oh my God, thank you so much for coming all the way out here and like shucking 1,000 oysters. And, they loved, all of my coworkers were tired of my story after I was done with it, but, just having my little tagline and people were like, this is so amazing. And
What was the
it was like so
tagline?
much fun. So we shucked our Chelsea Gems, which
Uh-huh.
are our flagship oyster. So they're a tide tumbled oyster. They take about 6 to 9 months to grow.
Oh, nice.
Um, they are also what we use. So they're a Pacific oyster. And I would just like give people these tasting notes. And I'm like, they have this like really fun kind of melon cucumber note to them, but they're a soft brine oyster. They grow at the mouth of an estuary. So they have, mixed salinity. And people were just like, oh my God. And they just kept coming back and kept coming back. And we didn't bring any lemons, no mignonette, no hot sauce. And people were just like obsessed. And it was so fun to just see people coming back. They're just like, oh my God, we never get these. We never get oysters like these. I'm like, yeah, because East Coast oysters are amazing, but your European flats they're just all briny. They're
Yeah,
so
for
briny.
sure. Yeah.
So
So
it was like, I think it was fun for people to find something that was just like, oh, what
this is
is this?
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's the crazy thing. My experience with West Coast oysters is kind of different because at the time I was working for a raw bar and they were bringing in oysters, but honestly, they weren't the freshest.
Mm,
And I was like, okay, people want these. All right, cool. I'll shuck them, but I'm like, I wouldn't eat these. It was like that. But I mean, of course, there was nothing wrong with them. It's just as far as the quality that I like. I mean, even now, like I if the oyster's not beautiful, I'm not eating it anyway,
yeah.
for one thing. But anyway, back to the story. So I did this event for Taylor Shellfish. They came to DC and I believe we shucked at some building downtown in DC. And they had Kumamotos and Shigukus and Kushi overnight, flown overnight. And I was hesitant to eat one because of like the past experiences, just like any other normal person, like right.
Yeah.
Um, but once I ate one, like I ate one of each, and that's when I fell in love with Kumamotos. I was like, whoa.
Just like, damn.
I was like, what? These are not the Kumamoto that I remember. These are not
Yeah.
the Kumamoto that come to the raw bar. And like just those few days out of the water difference or weeks, who knows? But like it's just that quality, like, and I'm sure you guys had the freshest of the fresh, also that you took to the East Coast. So I'm sure like people minds were being blown.
Oh yeah. I mean, we overnight freighted ours. So when
See?
we were at
Yeah.
Billion, just overnight, they got there right before we got to the event, and we
Yeah.
just immediately started chucking. So yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we have so many people who come from out of town because besides Taylor, we're one of the largest purveyors of domestic oyster growers. So obviously Hog Island is huge, Hama Hama is huge. Like there are these like big players. But like when you're finding Manila clams at a restaurant, they're likely ours if they're not Taylor's. So for how small our farm actually is, we have a lot of production. And it's so interesting because people they come in and they're like, I don't want to call myself a snob, but I am definitely a snob. You get people who are like, oh yeah, I'm from Texas. Can I have horseradish and hot sauce and limes? And I'm just like, of course you can have your oysters however you want them. But can you, and I always ask him, like, can you please just promise me that you'll try one with just a little bit of lemon and that's it?
Yeah.
And people are normally like, damn. And then they're like, I didn't eat any of this. And I'm like, this is why I say it. So
Yeah.
it's been fun to kind of like convert people again, especially being landlocked. I feel like I have that concept of like understanding that people are really timid around oysters
Yeah.
and people are scared of things they don't know. So they might like oysters, but if they don't know the background or the history or anything like that, they get very shy about it. And so I'm like, hey, I didn't have my first oyster until I was 22 and I hated it. I'm like, that's what happens when you live in Detroit and you buy an oyster from Whole Foods and it's probably been sitting there for 3 days.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just takes trying it and retrying it and understanding like what you're looking for. So it's been really fun, like getting people excited when people are like, oh, I'm gonna have my second dozen. I'm really sorry. And I'm like, don't be sorry.
Don't be
Like
sorry at
you
all.
filter feed like 50 gallons of water per each oyster. Eat more, please.
Yes.
You can plant
Yep.
more.
Yeah, don't worry about the backside. Just go on, eat
Right.
another dozen or 3,
I'm like, this is why we're here. Just keep eating them, please.
Yeah. So how was it working on the farm and working with gooey duck?
Gooey duck is interesting. It's also an interesting subject in Washington as a whole. So I don't know how familiar you are, but
Not at all. Why is it a very interesting conversation?
so gooey duck doesn't traditionally grow past California, and there are some like kind of natural beds of gooey duck, but they primarily grow only in Washington and Oregon. We've kind of decimated any other populations on the coast. So huge exportation of gooey duck from the West Coast. A lot of American clientele don't love gooey duck because they're not the most exciting thing to look at, and people don't really understand
I'd
how to
say it's
cook them
pretty exciting to
properly.
look at. It's very interesting.
Depends on who you are, I
It's
guess.
pretty interesting. I mean, it's like no other. I'll
Yeah.
put it like this. Like no other. It's definitely it is definitely an eye catcher.
Yeah. So a lot of people just they don't understand how to process it properly. Again, that kind of concept of like people don't like to order things that they're not confident about. And that's been an issue at the restaurant is people don't know how to pronounce it. Since it's spelled geoduck. So a lot of people are just like, I'm just not gonna get that thing because I don't know if that's actually how you say it or not.
Right.
So gooey duck is actually gway duck, which is the native tongue for what the species is. So they take about 18 months from their planting to when you can remove a tube. So a lot of tide holders don't really love leasing their lands to gooey duck growers because they have to look at PVC piping on their beaches for at least 18 months. Because unlike most other shellfish, gooey duck can't replant themselves. So if they're pulled out of the silt, they just die. So they can't, dig or swim like a scallop would or anything like that. So they're a very finicky clam. When you're planting them, you can't have any lotion on your hands, nothing with fragrance. You got to water the garden is what we call it. When you're stomping in all your tubes and you put your gooey ducks in there, you have to water all of them to make sure they have enough water in their tubing. But they take about 3 years for commercial range in the US and about 5 years for export. So they're interesting and they are very hard to harvest.
Yeah. You got to go elbow deep, right?
Sometimes more.
Oh, wow.
Like
Okay.
I've gone like all the way in the water because their siphons can extend upwards of 6 feet. So if you don't have that thing by the siphon, it's gone and you're probably never going to get it back. So they're a very niche product in a very niche market.
So you're saying you got to sneak up on the gooey duck?
Pretty much, because they love to just like stick their siphons out. And it's really fun when you're like walking on the beach and it's low tide and they're just like, there's like a water show happening.
Right.
They're just siphoning off all their water. But the second you touch one, they're just like, nope.
So do they have a job in like Mother Nature? Like are they filtering water or like are they just
Yeah.
okay.
So a lot of the times when you're looking to improve the quality of a beach, so like at any sort of tideland,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's an expensive investment, but oftentimes when you're reestablishing a tide, like a tideland, your best bet is to plant gooey ducks because again, they don't shift, they don't move. So they're actually like reestablishing all of that hard silt and keeping your tidelands in place. So a lot of the times you'll see farms that, you know, you're planting all of these seeds and sometimes they have runoff, you know, it's inevitable, but you'll get these random parts of beaches in Washington where you just have tons of beached overgrown oysters, what we call cowboy oysters here. It's like the big boys that are like 6 inches long, like they're huge.
Massive oysters,
Like
yeah.
you only want to grill them with a lot of cheese or a lot of butter.
Nice.
But those kind of, they start to tear away at the tidelands when they just bulk up. So gooey ducks do a really good job of like reestablishing that intertidal zone. So they're pretty great for that. And especially if you're looking to reestablish species that are having a hard time. So like Dungeness, obviously crabs are huge predators of shellfish in general, but they love to snip the siphons of gooey ducks. So again, expensive investment, but if you're looking to kind of reestablish an environment, they're a really good option because they just, same with like razor clams, they kind of have that same concept where they attract more predation. So if you're
Yeah.
looking to invigorate an environment, they're really great for that.
So I just really can't imagine like Dungeness crabs just swimming around, but like are Dungeness similar to like our blue crab on the East Coast? Like are they just out there or I mean I'm not sure if you know, I'm just, I was just
They're
curious really.
they're not as like prevalent as blue crab would be. Because Washington is very strict about a lot of things.
Uh-huh.
So again, like if you're harvesting gooey duck, you have to harvest everything because again, they
Hmm.
just will die.
Yeah.
So it's actually illegal to, like, you can be fined or lose your license if you don't harvest everything. So a lot of gooey duck farmers are like, oh, this one's underweight, I don't want it. And it's like, you don't really get that option. Same with like abalone in California. That's a huge thing. And then here with Dungeness, you can't harvest female crabs. So the populations aren't decimated, but they're not, I mean, people love Dungeness. They're delicious, unfortunately for them. So you can lose your license for harvesting female Dungeness crabs. They are pretty prevalent here, but they're not nearly as much as like a blue crab is on the East Coast.
Nice. So tell me a little bit about Pacific Shellfish
So
Growers Association. Is what-
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association, we have been around for, in some form or fashion, for like 50-ish years. Kind of our nonprofit standpoint is to assist your Joe everyman with your growers. So we're looking to kind of create this balance of, say someone is looking to sell land and they know that it's viable for oyster harvest, they'll reach out to us and then we'll just send out an email saying, hey, anybody in this area looking to lease land or something like that. And then again, just that outreach sort of perspective is the education or re-education. So we do a lot of Vibrio training. We work heavily with NOAA, and we also work with water quality testing in our area. So we do, with the Coast Guard, they do weekly water testing. So we're constantly getting all of this information from them just so we know what part of the sound could potentially be an outbreak area for like algal blooms or anything like that. So we're just the go-between. So the little middleman, we're very small. We are currently a staff of 3. So when I say
Oh
small,
wow.
very
All right.
small.
Easy
Yeah.
enough. So 3 staff and I guess a bunch of volunteers.
Depends on the event.
Was right, right,
So
right. Gotcha.
yeah.
Cool. Cool. I think I've hit everything. Like without rambling, I think we've hit some heavy hitters. Like you're pretty knowledgeable about everything. Glad
I
you like
try.
I'm glad you hit me up and was like, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I forgot or left out?
I don't think so. I mean, we all love oysters. I guess that's why we're here. So,
Yeah, for sure. Any last message or um anything you want to leave for the listeners?
yes, actually, if we're going to stay in that vein of education, a big thing that happens here, especially at the restaurant, is people love to take shells home with them because they're like, they're so beautiful. Like, I want to, take shells home. And I'm like, all right, my one stipulation is you can take them home as long as you promise me you will not put them in any water system. And people are like, oh, why? And I'm like, because they can really mess up that, marine environment. So that's always my one big thing. And people are always so surprised. I'm like, I don't think you understand the bacteria from transport, from being out at an oyster bar, touching your face, your hands, all that stuff. I'm like, you're going to contribute that to a water system and potentially harm it. So, oysters are great at doing what they do, but they also are finicky little babies who are very sensitive.
Yeah.
So that's like my one big thing. So I just have to make people promise. I'm like, I need a verbal promise before you leave here with oyster shells. Like, they're good for compost. You can use them in your yard, but
Uh-huh.
don't put them back in water. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm gonna put them in like my fish tank. And I'm like, don't do that. You're gonna kill your fish.
Got
So
you.
yeah, that's my one big thing.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for, joining the podcast ranks, letting me interview you. I'm super glad I didn't interview you last night because who knows where the conversation would have went. Um, but thank you for all the hard work you're putting in, with the Pacific growers, with the putting work in. Just the educational portion alone is awesome. We need more people like you. I would vote for you. Whatever you're running
We're
for,
trying. We're
whatever you're running for, I'll vote for you.
maybe one of these days. I don't know if politics are ever in my favor, but
Yeah.
at
Well,
least like working our way in some form or fashion of that. So
yeah. All right. Well, keep the Oyster Ninja podcast in mind. And of course, we're here to spread the news also. So thank you so much. Where
yeah,
can people
absolutely.
find you far as if they want to get a drink from you, if they want to if you want to be their waitress or bartender, or you just wear many hats. So
I do. I wear lots of hats. So again, Chelsea Farm Oyster Bar downtown in Olympia. So we're close to the water at around Bud Bay Inlet. So um, I'm usually there on the weekends. Otherwise, this is my day job. So I'll be at the office every other day besides, Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights. Um, but also social media. Um, yeah, I mean, hopefully one of these days we'll come across each other. I think we actually have an event coming up in DC soon. So maybe we can like orient something. I'm sure you'll probably beat me in an oyster shucking contest, but
no, it'll be close. It'll be close. I'm sure it'll be close. It'll be close. No, I'll probably beat you. No, I'm just joking. Just
I'm
joking.
sure you'll beat me. At least in like quickness alone.
Yeah, but it's not all about speed, as you know. Yeah, thank you. We shall see. Just hit me up, I guess, when you get close to DC, or maybe a week before, a couple days before. At least we can get a drink or something.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks
Um,
for having me. It was awesome.
for sure, for sure. And until the next time, listeners, go check out Chelsea
Farms.
Seafood, Chelsea Farms.
Yeah,
Um,
Chelsea Farms Oyster Bar.
yeah, check it out if you're in the area. And peace.